I went to classics of reflection, primarily in the Western tradition. So these were like Marcus Aurelius's diaries, the famous Roman diary, Meditations of Marcus Aurelius, spiritual exercises by Ignatius Loyola, the founder of the Jesuit order, who created what many view as sort of the first international, successful foreign international organization. Michel de Montaigne, who in the Western tradition has often been described as the one individual who knew himself better than anyone else knew him. A brilliant essayist who has been read by almost everyone. So in the background of what I was learning from the interviews was what I was learning from this reading. And so I put this together in another short little book that is called Step Back. And it basically says that reflection really is important. It says, and this is another, I think, somewhat unconventional idea, that you should put aside the standard view of reflection, which I call go up to the top of the mountain. This is reflection is solitary, tranquil, under the guidance of a minister, a priest, a guru, reading a holy book of some kind. That's not the way almost no one has time to do that these days. And what I found through the interviews that these executives were doing was what I came to call mosaic reflection. Reflection done in short bits of time throughout their days, customized in very personal ways to what they were doing, to their jobs, to their leisure time, to their friendships. Little pockets of reflection done in highly customized ways. And so the book describes that in terms of three large types of reflection. And these reflect the great tradition of reflection, at least in the West. And sometimes that reflection takes the form of what I call downshifting, looking out the window, quieting your mind. The second takes the form of what I call pondering, looking at something from a variety of different perspectives. And in that chapter, I describe what I learned from these executives about how they went about pondering and looking from a variety of perspectives. The third classic approach I described as measuring up. And this is where you ask yourself, am I meeting my standards and standards of other people? What do they expect of me? And basically, in each of these chapters, I described what I learned from the interviews about how the managers and executives did these types of reflection. There was a theme that ran through the whole book. It came from another executive interview. I put it right at the beginning of the book, and I'll make it my closing comment on this book, Step Back. This interview was with a guy who had been a very successful venture capitalist in healthcare, initially in North America and then ultimately in China as well. I don't know how things are going in China these days, but he had a long, great stretch there. And he often sat on the board, as you'd expect, of the companies that his firm was investing in. And he said that he would always tell the young CEOs of these companies the following. He would say, if I ever come into your office and I find you with your feet up on your desk, looking out the window, I'm going to double your salary. Okay? I'm not going to fire you. I'm going to double your salary. And this is his way of saying that you're so busy, especially running a startup, fighting fires, that you don't take the time to step back, think, and reflect on the big issues about your business, how you're running the business. Is it what you want to do? Can you do it better than the people you're working with? It's so hard to do. He said, I got to threaten to double their salaries to get them to do it. So that's the perspective in this book, that reflection is important. You often end up doing it in little bits and pieces. Here's how to do it. So it's got that sort of Harvard Business School pragmatism to it. So I did say I want to leave some time for questions, and I'll just briefly mention what I'm at the very beginning of studying and thinking about now. which is an even bigger departure from what I've done in the past. But as I said at the beginning, there's sort of three tranches of business ethics work. And the first one is so-called business and society, often picked up as, are we a stakeholder company or a shareholder company? And my going in thinking, pending serious reading, somewhat discursive reading, pending interviews, and then trying to give some shape to what I learned, is that this is a profoundly oversimplified way of thinking about corporate responsibility. My view is that most big companies, and increasingly many small ones, are deeply interlocked, entrenched, and intermeshed with the societies around them in countless ways, form the U.S., the North American auto industry. But that's the image in the background, that you're running an autonomous unit, you've got outside parties, you've got to negotiate with them, you've got to obey the law. You can often delegate that to external relations, to a VP for external relations. You've got to union to people who manage union relations. No. My starting view is that companies are now just sort of pervasively immersed in the societies around them and connected to organizations of all kinds around them in countless complex ways. And so the decisions the corporate executives make, the hardest decisions, are done within the interstices of all of these complex relationships. And this old sort of inside-outside boundaries around the firm, even some basic questions about strategy, probably really need to be rethought. So the last comment I'll make about this current adventure is what I'm really studying is Apple. And if you go back to the reality of the beginning of Apple, it was a classic economics textbook, tiny economic unit. Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak, and a third guy who was part of the company for like 8 weeks. He put in $800 and he decided it was too much money. So they bought back his shares. He'd be worth maybe $30 billion now if he hadn't made that mistake. So it was the two Steves. They were a classic little economic unit, buying components off the shelf, assembling them. Eventually they got a couple of employees, had to comply with labor laws. If you look at Apple's engagement with its world, it is engagement that is stunningly complex, and it's a mistake to reduce it to some simple stakeholder, shareholder view. Obviously, you want to send a message to everybody in your organization. Pay attention to stakeholders, treat them well, be careful about them. If it's a big issue, raise it to your senior folks. But that's not the way to start things out. Two really quick examples before I stop. Privacy is a huge issue for Apple Computer, okay? In China, it means one thing, okay? It's basically meant letting Chinese security authorities see and apparently even shape the code in Apple devices, okay? In Europe, it's radically different because the Europeans are extremely sensitive around issues of sensitivity around that. In the U.S., it's a third perspective, and it's not just some broad perspective. It's very specific cases, as when there's a terrorist act, the terrorists have a phone, the FBI says, please give us a backdoor to the phone, unlock it so we can see it. Apple says, no, we won't do that, and it goes to court. And this issue goes to the top of the organization. So privacy is extraordinarily complex in a vast range of different situations, region by region, country by country, regulator by regulator. And then the final way of thinking about how pervasive it is that it had been widely rumored and never denied that CEO Cook was gay. And maybe 10 years ago now, he decided to come out and disclose his sexuality to the world. If any of you have any questions, I think we've got another.
Okay. Thank you so much, Professor.
So how should we do this?
Yes, surely. So thank you so much for a wonderful lecture. We all, I think, everybody has enjoyed it. One quick question from my side. As you all already mentioned about Apple company. So what was the role of Bill Gates or Steve Jobs? Whom do you say who took the hardest decision?
Well, they've all made so many tough ones. Good question. You got me pausing to think. I think Jobs is fascinating because he was such a determined individual, described as a dog with a bone. And he often had a wrong bone in his mouth. So he almost destroyed it. The small Apple company, he got kicked out of it. He took some very risky decisions when he came back. And I think in many ways, his decisions were probably harder than Gates because the stakes were higher. He was risking all of Apple, either when it was small, starting with Macintosh, or later on when he moved, for example, into phones. You know, Gates' trajectory as a businessman was funny because in the early years, when IBM was trying to get into the PC business, the company made what's been described as the worst mistake in business, in the history of business, because it said, you know, we make mainframes. PCs are toys. So we'll create a little division and we won't give it much money and we'll let them make some PCs and we'll see what's going on in this market. So they did a deal with this little company called Microsoft and they said, there's no problem if you want to have the rights, the intellectual property rights to work between MS-DOS. That's okay. And Microsoft built its whole business around that. What would Apple look like today if it had taken PC operating system software seriously? It's an interesting sort of little thought process. So I think for a long time, Gates was in a very powerful position, unlike Jobs. He probably pushed it too hard, you know, ending up with the antitrust, with the government as an adversary. I think what's impressive about Gates is the really hard decisions he's made once he stepped down, which is to take so much of his money and almost all of his time. And this is an easy thing to say. If we were all, you know, multi-billionaires, we could imagine we would do the same thing. But instead of buying yachts and sitting on boards, the succession of efforts around global health, around the environment, now around agriculture, I don't know if I think those would be hard decisions for a lot of people. And he made them, and I think he deserves a lot of credit for that. In terms of the struggle, we struggled with some really hard issues. So that would be my quick answer.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Think about it the next time around.
So another question from over to Dr. Badaracco.
Thank you for the wonderful talk, sir. I have one small question.
Thank you.
Talking about hard decisions, what is that one hard decision that you had to take till date, and what were the factors that you had to deal with while implementing it?
All right. Another excellent question. So, my hardest decision took place almost 30 years. Professor had basically taken a long working paper that the assistant professor had written based on dissertation research and sent it to a conference as his working paper without any reference to the young professor who had written it. So it's just an overt, no-brainer intellectual property violation. And his initial response when the assistant professor raised it was, well, this is just how things work in academia. So I didn't think that was the case by any means, nor did my young colleague. And so I was her close advisor for a couple of years when we tried to resolve this. And to be candid, as you could imagine, this got to the dean of the business school, and you've got, a situation with a famous professor. It would be bad for not only this individual's reputation, to destroy his career, bad for the school's reputation. It would cause all sorts of turbulence within the faculty. So I sort of watched the dean as he tried to maneuver his way through the situation. In the end, there was a lot of damage. So the young professor was able to stay at the school for a number of years, but the tenure prospects were basically over. But the professor was able to stay long enough to move to another good position. The professor who committed the intellectual property violation was repeatedly investigated, and word of this spread. And of course, when people came and asked me what went on, I was candid. He was basically disempowered. Other people think he should have been punished more severely. He was basically disempowered. And along the way, I had to make a lot of hard decisions. Because I failed to mention at the beginning, I actually knew and worked with quite closely the senior professor. So, and I was not tenured at the time. So I had to navigate a series of very tough choices involving the young professor who was relying on me, involving the senior professor who had been a friend after this incident, no longer was, and of course, involving the school and my prospects there. At any point, I had this document. I could have sent it to the press. The Wall Street Journal would have loved the story. So that wasn't, as many of these decisions are, it wasn't a single decision at a point in time. That's the sort of dramatic thing we put into a case study. But it was a series of hard decisions, and I think I learned a lot from it, and it's probably reflected in a lot of what I wrote. So, good question. I should maybe go back and revisit what I did and how I thought about it as I go further.
Thank you.
I think we were frozen.
One more question.
Yes, sir.
Well, there we go.
Good morning, sir. I hope you're doing well. Sir, this is Dr. Pooja Mishra. And when we are talking about leadership and tough decision making, the role of emotion is definitely important here. So my question is, how does emotional maturity of a leader impacting on his or her decision making ability?
Yes. That's a question that I think would merit a couple of books. That's a great question. I think it has an immense unseen impact. These big decisions are tests of emotional maturity. The first book I wrote, which I didn't describe, was called Defining Moments, and I said that when you face a really hard decision, there are three things at stake in these. These defining moments test you, so they test your emotional maturity. They reveal something about yourself, about your skills, your competence, your values, and I'd say your emotional maturity. And then they shape you going forward. Hard decisions are not purely analytical. There's a lot of emotions involved. And you say, we're going to do this, and then you execute it, and you live with it. Maybe it works, maybe it doesn't. That's formative. It's kind of shaping for you and for your organization. And I think these questions of emotional vulnerability, of emotional maturity, reveal issues of vulnerability. Because a lot of people get to the top, unfortunately, with one success after another. And my sense is that the people who get to the top and are more and more emotionally mature, people who have had trouble on the way up, who have made mistakes, who have been bounced around by life at work, and had to rethink themselves, their sense of how the world works, their sense of how they want to behave, and become more mature in an emotional sense. And people who've just been in the flow of success to the top, I think, really are vulnerable. It's easier for them to think of themselves as masters of the universe and go off and make profound mistakes. Not necessarily just ethical mistakes, but business mistakes. So you may have followed Mark Zuckerberg, a master of the universe in his early 30s, who has bet 20, 30, 40 billion dollars on the metaverse and has destroyed more than 50% of the value of his company in the last year or so. Now he runs that company, A and B shares. He controls most of these. He controls the B shares, or maybe the A shares. I don't know. But he's the king. He decides. He's like Xi Jinping, experiment, somebody absolutely all powerful. So when you get to a position, and I don't know Mark Zuckerberg, but he looks to me like somebody who's been in the flow of success, who's never been tested, who's never had to reflect. And that's what raises the question to me about this huge commitment to the metaverse, even changing the name of the company. I don't know. So emotional maturity is absolutely critical and well worth studying. And by the way, it's an advantage of looking at these issues from the perspective of literature, because then you really do get to look inside somebody and see what shaped their character, their maturity, and what they know and what they still know.
Thanks a lot, sir. You explained really well. Sir, a couple of minutes more so that we can ask one more question.
Yes, one more question. That will work, yes. But then I've got to start getting ready to teach. Yes.
Thanks a lot, sir. So I request Dr. Vidya Jahan to please unmute yourself and raise your question.
Good morning, sir.
Good morning.
Thank you for the talk.
Sure.
Thank you for the talk. Sir, my question is, and it is probably related to the last part of your talk, sir. It's like cross-cultural leadership is really difficult. But what, according to you, do you think is the most important thing to be kept in mind while leading a group with extreme diversities?
Well, I could have talked about that for a while if you hadn't said most important.
One most important, just one most important. Which according to you think is one most important?
You know, I think the most important question, the most important skill is what I would describe all too simply is just really, really listening. So making sure that when someone from a different background is speaking to you or to others, that you and others are really making an effort to, first of all, put the person at ease so they feel comfortable saying a little more about what they really think, or they really feel. Nobody's completely at ease and nobody says everything. I don't even want everybody coming to me and saying everything. But a little more at ease. And then trying to get a sense of what they may be saying between the lines rather than what they're saying explicitly. And then I think you may want to try to do the same thing. So when you, as the leader or as a member of an organization, say something that you think may not be understood because your background is different from others, say that. Say a little bit more about this is what you might not be understanding about me, and this is why I see things given my background and my experience. So this is going to slow meetings down. And some people are going to find it awkward. But people are just complicated. There's many, many layers and levels there. And don't assume you can understand them or treat them because you're talking with somebody who has a different background. Final thing I'd say is, don't assume that because somebody's got the same passport and the same skin color and a similar sort of resume as you, that you actually can read between all the lines of what they're saying, okay? So, in almost every case, you want to try to really listen. And Harvard Business School has been accused of being what's called the West Point of extroversion. Ask the question, what's the meaning of life? All the hands go up. And we certainly want people. We want people to graduate, to go into meetings, be thoughtful, and then say what they think. But the key method is in your play between one person speaking and 90 people listening. And we like to think that we're developing these listening skills in a very diverse classroom as well. And it's an effort. It's listening to more than content. It's listening to what musicians call the sort of overtones and undertones, is the way I put it. So that's a quick answer to your question.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir, for answering all the questions. May I now request Dr. Pooja Mishra ma'am to propose vote of thanks.
Thank you, ROE madam. It is righteously said that gratitude for being kind opens the door to the power, the wisdom, and the creativity of the universe. A warm and cherished good morning to Joseph sir, and good evening to all present here. On behalf of Sarala Birla University and its entire fraternity, my sincere thanks to the speaker of this event, Professor Joseph L. Badaracco, John Shad, Professor of Business Ethics, Harvard Business School, USA. Though, sir, all the points discussed by you today were full of information, but still to highlight one or two of them. Most significant leadership pattern stands out of spotlight, and that the road to become a great leader is often full of struggles. Sir, I must say that if time was money, then we all have earned it in millions today. A special thanks to our Honorable Vice Chancellor, Professor Gopal Pathak sir, for taking this valuable initiative towards organizing this webinar and giving us the opportunity to learn something new. I would extend my thanks to Honorable Registrar, Professor Vijay Kumar Singh sir. I extend my thanks to all our respected deans, associate deans, HODs, officials, faculty members, and non-teaching members of SBU family for being part of this event. And of course, to all our beloved students who are eagerly waiting to hear more from you. And they really have earned so much of information today. As we draw the curtains of this event, I humbly request to sir that we would definitely be looking forward for more such sessions whenever your schedule permits, sir. Once again, thanks to all present here, and special thanks to the speaker of today's event. Take care and have a safe day ahead, sir. And to all of you, of course. Thank you.
Thank you. Good to meet you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Thanks again.
Bye. Thank you.